My daughter said she didn't want me for Christmas, so I changed my will. I am Margaret Sinclair, 65 years old, Palm Beach widow, collector of objets I once mistook for meaning. I have homes whose windows face oceans and avenues, accounts that refill themselves like obedient tides, and a last name that opens doors before I lift a hand. If you believe such things guarantee tenderness, you have not lived as long as I have. Wealth saves time, it does not save love. I learned that late, too late perhaps, and the learning began on a warm December afternoon when the palms were clacking like gossip outside my bedroom balcony and the air smelled of salt and sunscreen. Florida was pretending it was summer, as it often does, and I was pretending my family was whole. I had always imagined that Christmas would be different, that it would be the one time of year when everything fell into place. For most of my life, I had spent the holiday season crafting the illusion of perfect family unity, ornate decorations, perfectly roasted dinners, and those quiet moments that should have been filled with warmth. Palm Beach provided the perfect setting: sunny skies, luxurious homes, and an effortless beauty. Yet this Christmas felt different. It was as if something had broken quietly under the surface, and I could no longer pretend it wasn't there. The grand tree stood in the corner of the room, its lights twinkling like distant stars, and the soft glow of candles flickered on the mantel. My staff had done their best to make the house beautiful, but no amount of decoration could disguise the distance between me and my daughter. Isabel, my only child, had grown colder in recent years, and the gap between us seemed to widen with every passing day. There were no longer the gentle conversations we once shared, no more moments of closeness. I had worked so hard to build this legacy, to make her life one of comfort, but now, as I gazed across the room at her, I saw only a shadow of the daughter I once knew. She lived with me here in Palm Beach, but it felt like she existed in another world. Her smile was often strained, her words clipped. The warmth I had always tried to create had turned to ice. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, that she would come around, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It wasn't just a bad day or a rough week. It was something far deeper, something I had failed to address for years. I had spent so much time trying to create the perfect family, the perfect life, the perfect daughter, but the reality was that Isabel didn't need perfection. She needed something I hadn't given her: space to be herself, space to make her own choices without the weight of my expectations. I had never understood that. I thought love was something I could earn through grand gestures, through the life I had built for her. But it had never been enough. When I texted her on December 23rd, asking if she would be joining me for dinner the next evening, I didn't expect the response I received. The reply was blunt: no. I waited, heart pounding, for an explanation. When none came, I pressed her further. Why? A second message arrived. I don't want you here for Christmas. The words hit me like a physical blow. I could feel the weight of them sinking deep into my chest. How could she say such a thing? How could my own daughter, the one I had sacrificed so much for, reject me so coldly? I had built this life around her. I had given everything to make sure she had the best, everything I thought she needed to feel loved and valued. And now, in a matter of seconds, she had told me she didn't want me, not even for Christmas. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them brought clarity. All I felt was hurt, and anger, and confusion. I had always believed that I could buy love. I had surrounded Isabel with luxuries, opportunities, and comfort. I had given her everything, and in return, I expected affection and loyalty. But Isabel had rejected me in the most painful way possible, and with that rejection, something inside me snapped. This wasn't about Christmas, I realized. This was about years of silent resentment, of unspoken demands, and of a relationship that had been built on fragile foundations. In that moment, I saw the truth of our relationship more clearly than I ever had before. It wasn't just a mother giving everything for her child. It was a mother who had used control, wealth, and perfection as tools to mold her daughter into what she thought was best. And in doing so, I had pushed Isabel away. I had smothered her. I had forced her to live in a box of my making, and she had finally broken free. I sat down at the edge of my bed, staring at the screen of my phone, the words from Isabel still flashing before my eyes. The hurt was sharp, but a different feeling started to creep in: clarity. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Isabel didn't want this life. She didn't want me, not in the way I had imagined. And it was time to face the painful truth of our fractured relationship. As the sounds of the palm trees swayed outside and the light from the Christmas tree cast long shadows across the room, I couldn't help but wonder. Had I given Isabel everything, or had I simply taken too much from her? I had built a fortress around her, one made of wealth and expectations, but I had never stopped to ask if it was the life she wanted. And now, as I looked around at the perfection I had created, I realized it didn't matter. Perfection was an illusion. Love was not something I could buy, and this Christmas was the moment I had to face that truth. It was December 23rd when Isabel's words hit me like a brick wall. I had spent the entire day preparing for the dinner that would never be. The house was spotless, as always, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey had filled the air, but it all seemed absurd in the face of her rejection. I had always taken pride in my ability to organize everything, to make every detail flawless. But today none of it mattered. The decorations, the food, the staff, none of it could change what was between Isabel and me. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing around the house, unable to focus on anything. The holiday music that had played cheerfully in the background now seemed hollow. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. "I don't want you here for Christmas." The finality in her message still stung, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself that it was just a momentary outburst, the truth lingered. I texted her again, hoping for some explanation, something that would soften the blow. I wasn't ready to give up on this holiday, on the idea that somehow, if I just tried hard enough, we could have one moment of peace. I asked her again, with the kind of vulnerability I hadn't shown in years. "Isabel, what happened? Why do you feel this way?" The response came swiftly. "I just don't want to be around you, okay? It's too much." My heart sank further as I read those words. Too much. What did that mean? Too much of what? Of me? Of my expectations? Of the life I had built for her? I had spent years trying to be everything she could possibly need, and now, in a simple text, I was faced with the reality that it hadn't been enough. Worse, it had been overwhelming. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to say next. Isabel had always been a challenge to understand. She was never like my sons Alexander and Thomas, who had been more eager to follow my lead, more content to fit into the roles I had envisioned for them. But Isabel, she was always different. From the moment she was born, I had known she would require more attention, more guidance, more care. But somewhere along the way I had lost her. Or maybe in my attempt to shape her, I had pushed her so far away that she no longer felt like my daughter. I should have seen the signs sooner, I told myself. The way she had pulled away over the years, the small moments of rebellion that I had dismissed as temporary phases. She had always been the more independent of my children, but independence was different than rejection. And now Isabel was telling me in no uncertain terms that she didn't need me in the way I had thought. As I put the phone down, I tried to steady myself. I had always been a woman who prided herself on control. My wealth, my home, the life I had built, it was all about control. I could manage every aspect of my existence, or so I had convinced myself. But Isabel's rejection shattered that illusion. No amount of money, no amount of influence could make her love me in the way I had hoped. The house felt eerily quiet after that. I watched as my staff went about their work, preparing for a dinner that would never take place. But there was no joy in it now. There was only emptiness. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Isabel didn't want to be here. She didn't want to be with me. And it was more than just the holiday. It was everything, the years of sacrifice, of control, of overcompensating. It was all for nothing. I walked to my study, as I often did when I needed space, and sat at the desk where my will was kept in a locked drawer. I had always been meticulous about it, ensuring that every detail was perfect. But tonight it felt different. The weight of Isabel's words hung heavy in the air. I had always thought she would inherit everything. She was my only daughter, after all. But now, as I sat there, staring at the legal documents that had once seemed so simple, I realized that perhaps I had made a grave mistake. For years, I had believed that wealth was the answer to everything. I thought that by providing for Isabel, by giving her the best education, the finest clothes, the most extravagant experiences, I was showing her love. But now I saw it for what it truly was, control. I had built a life around her that I thought she would appreciate, that I thought would make her feel loved and cared for. But Isabel had made it clear that she no longer wanted any part of it. The decision was difficult to face, but it was clear. I began to write, altering my will to reflect the reality of our relationship. My sons, Alexander and Thomas, would inherit the majority of my estate. Isabel would still receive a portion, of course, but it would be far less than what I had originally intended. It felt like a betrayal, and yet it was necessary. Isabel's rejection had severed the bond between us, and now I had to make sure she would no longer have the power to hurt me, to use me, in the way she had done for so many years. I could feel the sting of each word I wrote. It wasn't about money, of course. It was about the emotional distance, the rejection. Isabel had made it clear that she didn't want my approval, my wealth, or my control. She didn't want me, at least not in the way I had hoped. So, I made the decision that would ensure I no longer had to live with the constant pressure to prove myself to her. I spent the next few hours in a haze, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me with each passing minute. The house was still too still. Outside, the palm trees swayed in the warm breeze, the sound of their leaves rustling like whispers, and yet all I could hear was the silence that had settled between Isabel and me. The Christmas dinner I had so carefully planned felt irrelevant now. What was the point of a perfect meal when the relationship that should have been at its heart was crumbling? I had always prided myself on being a strong mother. After all, what was wealth without a family to share it with? What was a life of comfort and luxury if you couldn't build something meaningful for those you loved? Isabel had been my focus for so many years. I thought if I could just give her everything, if I could ensure she had the best education, the finest experiences, and a life free from struggle, that she would understand how much I loved her. But love, it seems, is not something you can buy. I had spent so much of my life believing that sacrifice equaled love. After all, how could it not? I had worked tirelessly to provide for my children, particularly Isabel, the child who had always seemed to need more. I had given her everything, from the best private schools to vacations in Europe, from designer clothes to memberships in exclusive clubs. And all along, I had believed it was enough. That by doing this, I was showing her the depth of my devotion. But as I sat in my study, staring at the legal papers in front of me, I realized how wrong I had been. What had I actually given her? I had filled her life with material wealth, yes, but I had failed to give her the one thing that truly mattered, my presence, my emotional support, my ability to listen to her, to understand her without trying to mold her into my image of what she should be. I had spent so many years controlling her life, guiding her in ways I thought were best, but in doing so, I had suffocated her. I thought that by providing everything she could possibly want, I was protecting her. I thought I was creating a safe environment where she would flourish. But now, it seemed as though I had only created a gilded cage. And Isabel had finally broken free. She had rejected me, not just on Christmas, but in every decision she had made over the years to distance herself from me. She had shown me in the clearest terms possible that my love for her had been conditional. I had expected gratitude in return for all I had done, but Isabel didn't owe me anything. Not a single thing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my life had been spent chasing validation. Not from my friends, not from my social circle, but from my children. Isabel's rejection stung in a way that nothing else had. It was as if the very foundation of my life had been cracked open, and I was finally seeing things for what they truly were. The sacrifices I had made, the money I had poured into her future, the endless opportunities one had provided, it had all been to fill the empty space inside me. I had thought that by giving her everything, she would fill that space with affection and admiration. But she had done the opposite. She had taken her independence, and with it my control over her. I had always seen motherhood as a job to be done, a role I was supposed to fulfill. And I did it well, I thought. I was the perfect mother, supportive, generous, always there when needed. I didn't question the sacrifices I made because I believed they were for the greater good. But now I could see it clearly. I had been trying to buy her love, trying to earn her affection by giving her things rather than giving her myself. I had turned her into a recipient of my efforts rather than a partner in a relationship. I remembered when Isabel was little. She used to run to me for comfort, to share her triumphs and her fears. I used to feel so connected to her, so important in her world. But as she grew older, I noticed the distance creeping in. It was subtle at first, a few missed phone calls, a few less smiles, and eventually a growing silence. I had dismissed it, thinking it was just a phase. I told myself that she was simply becoming more independent, that it was normal for children to pull away as they matured. But now I knew the truth. Isabel hadn't pulled away because she was growing up. She had pulled away because I had pushed her away. I had made her feel as though she owed me something in return for all I had given her. The reality was painful. For all the sacrifices I had made, I had failed to build a real relationship with my daughter. And as much as it hurt to admit, it was clear to me now, Isabel's rejection wasn't just about Christmas. It was the culmination of years of unmet emotional needs, of a relationship that had become transactional rather than unconditional. I had given, but I hadn't listened. I had acted as though my wealth could compensate for my emotional absence, but wealth had never been enough. Isabel's rejection had forced me to confront the truth. I had been a mother who gave everything but never truly gave herself. And now, as I looked back on everything I had done for Isabel, I wondered if I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own well-being in the process. Was I so focused on making her life perfect that I had lost sight of my own? Was I so intent on building a legacy that I had neglected the one thing that mattered most? The bond between mother and daughter? I couldn't change the past, but I could change the future. And for the first time, I understood that I needed to stop pretending that everything could be fixed with money and grand gestures. Isabel didn't need more things. She needed me, but the me that I had never truly allowed myself to be, the real me, without the wealth, without the control, without the expectations. I couldn't undo the mistakes I had made, but I could learn from them. And that, I decided, was the first step toward healing, both for me and for Isabel. I had never been a sentimental person. My emotions were always kept in check, carefully controlled like the rest of my life. I had always believed that wealth, status, and the things I could provide would speak louder than any emotional display. But tonight, as I sat at my desk in my study, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything, the past, the mistakes, and the reality of the present. I had spent so many years focusing on my legacy, on building something that would endure. But as I stared at the legal documents in front of me, the true question emerged. What was a legacy worth if it was rejected by the one person I had expected to carry it forward? The decision wasn't easy. In fact, it felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. Isabel had been my focus for so many years. She had been the one I had poured everything into, the one I had assumed would inherit my wealth and legacy. But now, in light of her rejection, I had to face the uncomfortable truth. Isabel didn't want this life. She didn't want my wealth, my approval, my legacy. She had rejected me, and with that rejection, she had also rejected everything I had given her. The truth was so painful, so raw, that it felt like a betrayal of everything I had believed about motherhood. I opened the drawer of my desk and retrieved the papers that outlined my will. The will I had meticulously crafted over the years, ensuring that everything was perfect, that each of my children would receive their fair share. For so long, it had seemed like a simple task: allocate the assets, divide the properties, ensure that my children would be taken care of once I was gone. But now, as I read through the pages, I realized that my decisions had been made from a place of fear. Fear that my children wouldn't love me unless I gave them everything. Fear that without my wealth they would leave me. Isabel had already shown me that no amount of wealth could replace the emotional connection I had failed to build with her. I could feel the sting of my own actions as I picked up the pen and began to rewrite the will. Isabel had always been the one I had assumed would take the lion's share of my estate. She was my only daughter, after all. But as I stared at the figures on the paper, the realization settled in: she didn't deserve it. Not the way I had imagined. Not when she had rejected me so thoroughly. And perhaps, I thought, this would teach her something, a lesson I should have taught her years ago. Respect. Responsibility. The value of a relationship that wasn't built on transactions. It wasn't that I wanted to punish her. It wasn't that simple. I had already done enough of that by trying to control her life, by trying to make her into someone she wasn't. No, this was about boundaries, about understanding that love, real love, could not be bought, could not be manipulated with gifts and gestures. I had given Isabel everything, and she had rejected it all. Now, I would take back some of that control. I would no longer allow myself to be used as a means to an end. My sons, Alexander and Thomas, would inherit the majority of my estate. They had always been more receptive to my love, to my influence, and while I couldn't say they were perfect, they had at least shown me respect. They had never demanded anything from me in the same way Isabel had, and they had always valued the connection we shared, no matter how distant I had allowed myself to become. Isabel would still receive a portion, of course, but it would be far less than what I had originally intended. It was a cold decision, one that felt both necessary and painful. I couldn't help but think of the years I had spent building this life for her, and how it had all been for nothing. The material wealth, the fine things, the extravagant vacations, the perfect house, it was all irrelevant now. Isabel didn't want it. She had never wanted it. She had wanted me, but I had never given her the real me. I had buried myself in the role of a provider, a giver, and in doing so, I had failed to be the mother she needed. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper seemed to echo in the silence of the room. I had never felt more alone, and yet, for the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Isabel's rejection had forced me to confront the truth I had been avoiding for years, that I had sacrificed everything, including my own happiness, in pursuit of a perfect life. And now it was time to let go, to release her from the responsibility of my expectations, to stop pretending that love could be earned with material things. When I finished, I sealed the papers and locked them away in the drawer, my hands trembling slightly. I wasn't sure if this was the right decision. I wasn't sure if Isabel would ever understand. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't continue down this path. I couldn't keep giving, sacrificing, and hoping that someday she would appreciate it. She had made it clear that she didn't want that kind of relationship, and I had to accept that. There was a moment of stillness as I sat back in my chair, the weight of what I had just done settling on my shoulders. I had changed my will, but more than that, I had changed myself. I had let go of the illusion that I could control my children's love through material means. I had let go of the belief that wealth could fill the emptiness I felt inside. I had given Isabel everything I could, but now I needed to give myself the space to heal. Perhaps, in time, Isabel would come to understand. Perhaps, in time, I would learn to let go of the need for her approval. But for now, I had done what I needed to do. And that was enough. I knew that Isabel would be angry when she found out. What I hadn't anticipated was just how deep that anger would cut. It wasn't until the following afternoon that I received the call, a call I had been dreading, but knew was inevitable. The voice on the other end was tight with emotion, trembling with the force of a rage that seemed barely contained. "How could you do this to me, Mother?" Isabel's words felt like a slap, each one stinging harder than the last. "How could you take everything away from me like this?" I had been sitting at the breakfast table when the phone rang, the soft hum of the ocean waves outside the window a far cry from the storm brewing inside me. I could hear the anger in Isabel's voice, her words seething with betrayal, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. The will I had rewritten, the decisions I had made to reclaim my power, felt so final now. The quiet stillness of the house had never felt so loud. "I did what I had to do, Isabel," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, though the sting of her rejection was still fresh. "You made your choice. You rejected me, and you rejected everything I've given you. I can't keep pretending it's all fine, that nothing has changed." "Rejected you?" she spat back, her voice cracking. "You think this is about money? You think I care about that?" She paused, a shaky breath on the other end. "It's not about that, Mom. It's never been about that. It's about you. You've been trying to buy my love for years. You've been controlling me, suffocating me with your expectations, your perfect little life. I don't want it anymore. I don't want you." Her words hit harder than I could have ever anticipated, sharper than any cutting remark she had ever made. And yet, in some strange way, they also pierced the fog of denial I had been living in for so long. I had always believed that love could be earned, that all the sacrifices I had made, all the things I had provided, would somehow fill the void between us. But Isabel wasn't asking for more things. She wasn't asking for money, for gifts, for anything material. She was asking for something I had never given her: freedom. The freedom to exist without my expectations, without the weight of my love suffocating her. "You don't understand, do you?" Isabel continued, her voice breaking. "You never have. I never asked for any of this. You never gave me the space to make my own decisions, to figure out who I am. You've been living for me, and I've been living for you, and none of it's real. None of it ever was." I felt a lump form in my throat, the bitterness of her words threatening to choke me. She was right in a way I didn't want to admit. I had spent so many years focused on creating a life I thought would make her happy that I never stopped to ask her what she wanted. I had given and given, but only on my terms, only when it suited my vision of what a mother-daughter relationship should be. "I gave you everything," I whispered, the words thick with emotion. "Everything I thought you needed. Everything I thought would make you happy. And look where we are now," Isabel replied, her voice softer now, almost defeated. "Look at us. I'm so tired of being controlled. I don't want your things. I don't want your money. I want a mother who sees me for who I am, not who she wants me to be. I've been living in your shadow for so long, I don't even know who I am anymore." There was a long silence between us, a silence that stretched on, as if the weight of everything between us hung in the air, suffocating both of us. I wanted to apologize, to tell her that I understood, that I was wrong. But I couldn't find the words. And maybe deep down I knew it was too late for apologies. I had spent so much time trying to fix things with grand gestures, with wealth and control, but none of it had ever addressed the true problem. The real problem was me, not understanding her, not giving her the space to breathe, to grow, to be her own person. "I'm sorry," I finally said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm sorry I didn't let you be who you needed to be." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of stunned silence before Isabel spoke again, quieter this time. "I don't want your apology, Mom," she said softly. "I just want you to understand. I just want you to see me. I don't need anything from you anymore." The call ended after that. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, as the weight of her words settled over me. I had always prided myself on being a mother who could fix everything, who could make everything right. But for the first time, I understood that I couldn't fix this. I couldn't change the way things had been. And I couldn't force Isabel to love me in the way I wanted her to. Her rejection, painful as it was, had been the push I needed to see the truth. I had spent my life giving her everything I thought she needed, but I had never once stopped to ask what she actually wanted. I had been so focused on being the perfect mother, on controlling every aspect of her life, that I had missed the most important thing of all, her. The real her. The following days were a blur. I could barely bring myself to look at the extravagant decorations around the house, the same ones that had once seemed so perfect. Everything felt hollow now. The tree, the lights, the perfect holiday dinners, they all seemed like distant memories of a life I no longer recognized. Isabel wasn't coming back. She didn't want me the way I had wanted her. And that truth, that painful, undeniable truth, was a hard one to swallow. But there was something else in me too, a sense of liberation. Isabel had given me a gift, whether she realized it or not. She had freed me from the illusion of control, from the idea that love could be earned through sacrifice and grand gestures. She had taught me that love is not something you can demand. It is something you give freely without expectations. I wasn't sure where our relationship would go from here. I wasn't sure if there would be reconciliation. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never be the same. And perhaps, in some strange way, neither would Isabel. The days following my confrontation with Isabel were a blur. I had imagined that, after rewriting the will, I would feel a sense of control, a sense of finality. But what I had failed to consider was how hollow everything felt now. The wealth, the grandeur of my Palm Beach home, the expensive dinners, and the holidays, all of it now seemed like a facade, built to hide the truth I had been running from for so long. Isabel had always been my most complicated child. I had poured everything into her, convinced that my wealth and influence were enough to provide her with everything she needed. I had believed that by controlling her world, by giving her opportunities, by giving her things, I was showing her how much I loved her. But now I saw that I had been blind. The more I had given, the further away she had drifted. She didn't need my gifts, my money, my control. She needed my understanding. She needed space to breathe, to grow into the woman she wanted to become, not the one I had envisioned for her. And yet, all these years, I had ignored her needs in favor of what I thought was best. I had spent so much time trying to mold her into someone I could be proud of, and in doing so, I had lost her. When she had rejected me, I thought it was a final blow, a definitive end to our relationship. But in the silence that followed, I realized that it wasn't an end. It was a wake-up call. Isabel had finally had the courage to reject the life I had given her, the one I had created for her out of what I thought was love. And in doing so, she had set herself free. But what about me? What did this rejection mean for me? For so long, I had been defined by my role as a mother, by my ability to give and provide. Without that, who was I? The thought rattled me more than I was willing to admit. The foundation of my life had always been my family, and now, with Isabel pulling away, I felt as though everything was crumbling. I spent hours sitting in the quiet of my study, reflecting on the past, on the mistakes I had made. My sons, Alexander and Thomas, had never given me the same emotional challenges that Isabel had. They had always been more willing to accept what I offered, even if they had their own issues with me. But Isabel had always pushed back. She had always questioned everything, and I had never truly understood why. I had spent so much of my life controlling her, thinking that if I just gave her more, she would eventually see how much I cared. But the truth was I had stifled her, not nurtured her. I had imposed my vision of love on her, and she had rejected it. Now I was forced to face the consequences of that rejection, to understand that love is not something that can be coerced. It is something that must be given freely, and it must be received freely. Isabel's rejection had cracked open a part of me I had long ignored. I realized now that I had spent my life chasing approval, first from my parents, and then from my children. But in doing so, I had lost the ability to love myself. I had spent so much time focusing on what others needed, what they expected of me, that I had forgotten to ask myself what I needed. The silence between Isabel and me was deafening. I could no longer hide behind the illusion that things would eventually be okay. We were at a crossroads, and I didn't know where to go from here. Would Isabel ever forgive me? Would I ever be able to mend the rift between us? And if I did, would it even be the relationship I had once dreamed of? I didn't have the answers. What I did know was that I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep sacrificing pieces of myself in the hopes that it would fix our relationship. It was time to stop, time to start living for me, time to stop hoping that the next gesture, the next sacrifice, would make everything right. I had to face the truth. I couldn't control everything. And maybe that was the hardest lesson of all. I've spent so much of my life chasing the image of perfection, perfect homes, perfect children, perfect holidays. I thought that if I could create the perfect life, the perfect family, it would fill the emptiness I felt inside. But now, in the quiet of my study, with Isabel's rejection still raw, and the weight of everything I had done pressing heavily on my chest, I couldn't help but wonder what it was all for. I had spent so many years building a fortress of wealth, of status, of control. It was easy to hide behind the illusion that these things would make me happy, that they would make my family whole. I had convinced myself that providing for my children, especially Isabel, was the ultimate expression of love. I believed that if I gave them everything they could ever want, if I created a life of luxury and opportunity, they would appreciate it. They would see how much I cared. But Isabel's rejection had shattered that illusion. As I sat in my study, staring at the blank page in front of me, I wondered when it all went wrong. When did I stop being a mother who nurtured and started being a mother who controlled? When did I stop seeing Isabel as a person with her own dreams, her own desires, and start seeing her as an extension of my own vision for the world? I thought back to when she was younger. She had always been independent, always questioning. I had admired that about her, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to nurture that independence. Instead, I tried to mold her into the version of success that I thought she needed. I never stopped to ask her what she wanted. I never considered that my idea of love, of giving and controlling, might not be her idea of love at all. And now, with the reality of our broken relationship hanging over me, I realized that I had been living a life built on external validation. I had sought approval from my family, from my peers, from society. I had thought that if I could prove that I was a good mother, a successful woman, that somehow it would fill the void inside me. But it hadn't. The void was still there, still gnawing at me, and no amount of wealth, no amount of perfection had ever been able to fill it. The truth was, I had been living my life for others. For so long, I had defined myself by my role as a mother, by the things I could give, by the image I could project. But what was left of me when those roles were stripped away? When Isabel rejected my wealth, my sacrifices, my control, what did I have left? The woman in the mirror was a stranger to me, a woman who had spent her life building a legacy without ever considering what kind of legacy she wanted to leave behind for herself. I began to see the truth. I had spent my life seeking validation from others, particularly Isabel. I had believed that if I gave her everything, if I made her life as perfect as possible, she would love me in return. But I had been wrong. True love, I realized now, wasn't about what I gave. It wasn't about what I provided or how much I controlled. True love was about respect, about seeing the other person for who they truly were, not for who I wanted them to be. And now, as I faced the aftermath of my decisions, I had to face the fact that I had never truly loved Isabel in the way she needed. I had loved her in a way that was about me, about what I thought was best, about what I wanted her to be. But I had never allowed her to be her own person, and that, more than anything, had driven a wedge between us. I realized now that the love I had given Isabel had always been conditional. I had given her everything, yes, but it had always come with strings attached. I had wanted her to meet my expectations, to live up to the life I had planned for her. And when she rejected that life, when she rejected me, I had felt betrayed. But in truth, it wasn't betrayal. It was freedom. Isabel had finally done what I had never had the courage to do. She had rejected the life I had created for her, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her own. I began to understand that it wasn't too late for me, though. I could learn to live for myself, to stop defining myself by my ability to give, to control, to perfect. I didn't need to earn anyone's love. I didn't need to prove anything. I needed to rediscover who I was without the weight of everyone else's expectations on my shoulders. I had spent so much time trying to be perfect for Isabel, trying to build the life I thought she wanted, that I had lost sight of who I really was. Now, it was time to find her again. And perhaps, just perhaps, when I had found myself, when I had stopped seeking approval from others, I could begin to rebuild my relationship with Isabel, not on the basis of wealth, not on the basis of control, but on the basis of understanding, of acceptance, of love. A love that didn't come with expectations. A love that was truly unconditional. But first, I had to learn how to love myself. The lessons I had learned over the past weeks were profound, though painful. Isabel's rejection, which had initially felt like a personal betrayal, had slowly become the catalyst for my own growth. It had forced me to see the ways in which I had trapped both her and myself. By tying love to control, by building a life around expectations rather than genuine connection. For so long, I had believed that love could be earned through sacrifice. I had built my identity on being the perfect mother, the one who gave everything for her children. But I now realized that love doesn't work that way. It isn't a transaction, nor is it something that can be forced or controlled. True love is unconditional, freely given and received without strings attached. The hardest part of all was learning to let go. I had spent my life holding on so tightly to the idea of who I was supposed to be, to the life I thought I needed to create, that I had never allowed myself the freedom to simply be. I had defined myself by my role as a mother, a provider, but not as a woman who could live independently without the need for validation. As I sat in the quiet of my home, I realized that I didn't need to keep sacrificing my own happiness for others. I didn't need to prove myself through wealth or perfection. I had spent so much time seeking approval from my children, especially Isabel, but in the process I had lost sight of who I was. I needed to live authentically, not for anyone else, but for me. Isabel had taught me the greatest lesson of all, that true love is about freedom, acceptance, and respect. And now, as I began to let go of the weight of expectation, I understood that I didn't need her approval. I needed to live my life for myself, to stop chasing approval from others, to stop trying to prove my worth. I had learned to let go, and that was enough. The days following Isabel's rejection were marked by a strange clarity. The pain of her words had softened, leaving behind an unexpected sense of freedom. It was as if, in losing her approval, I had gained something more important, myself. For so long I had defined my life through others, through Isabel, through my role as a mother, through the expectations I placed on myself to be perfect. But now I had to ask myself, what do I want? What was left of me when I no longer had the role of the perfect mother, the perfect provider? I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under years of sacrifice and control. I took long walks along the beach, spent weekends visiting quiet towns, and immersed myself in things I had long forgotten: art, literature, the simple pleasure of being alone with my thoughts. I didn't need anyone's approval. For the first time, I was living for me, not for anyone else. I also reconnected with Alexander and Thomas, my sons, who had always been more distant, but never rejected me the way Isabel had. I reached out to them, not out of duty, but out of a desire to rebuild those relationships, to be present without trying to control their lives. I let go of the need to shape them, just as I had to let go of shaping Isabel. In the quiet of those moments, I realized the hardest lesson of all. Love cannot be earned through grand gestures or sacrifices. True love is free, given and received without strings attached. Isabel had taught me that. I had tried to buy her affection with my wealth and control, but it had only pushed her away. And now I had to learn to love myself, not for what I could give, but simply for who I was. The future no longer seemed like a series of obligations. I didn't have to prove anything. I could live for myself, without the need for validation. I wasn't defined by my wealth, my children, or anyone's expectations. I was free to explore, to create, to simply be. Isabel's rejection had been painful, but it had set me free from the illusions I had built around love and success. And now, as I looked out over the ocean, I knew that my future was mine to shape, without fear, without guilt. I was ready to embrace it. The holidays came and went without much fanfare. Isabel and I did not reconcile, and though it weighed on me, it no longer consumed my thoughts. The desire for her approval that had once defined me had been replaced by something more powerful: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace I had imagined, one that would come with perfect understanding or a perfect relationship. It was quieter, deeper, the kind that only comes when you stop striving for something you can never have. I still thought about Isabel, of course. A mother never stops thinking about her child, no matter the distance between them. But the obsession I had once had with her love, her acceptance, had faded. I had given her everything I could, but the truth was, she had never asked for any of it. Isabel wanted freedom, space, the right to live her own life without the weight of my expectations. In rejecting me, she had set us both free, whether I was ready for it or not. I had come to accept that our relationship might never be what I had envisioned. And that was okay. There was a part of me that would always long for the closeness we once shared, but I also knew that love, real love, can't be forced. I had spent too many years trying to mold her, trying to shape her into someone she was never meant to be. But now, I realized that the truest form of love is letting go, letting her be who she needed to be, just as I needed to be who I truly was. I spent more time focusing on myself, traveling, enjoying the moments I had once overlooked. I walked through art galleries without rushing, sat in cafes reading books that had nothing to do with business or motherhood. I spent evenings with friends, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely enjoyed their company. Slowly, I began to rediscover who I was outside of the roles I had worn for so many years: mother, wife, businesswoman. I was finally able to breathe without the pressure of always being perfect, of always being in control. Alexander and Thomas, too, saw a shift in me. Our relationship deepened, though it wasn't perfect. I no longer expected them to meet my needs or to validate my choices. I let them live their lives without trying to control them. I simply became a mother who loved them for who they were, not for what they could give me. I didn't expect them to carry my legacy or to replicate the life I had built. They were their own people, and in letting go of my expectations, I found that I could love them more fully. As for Isabel, I hadn't spoken to her in months. The silence between us wasn't just her rejection, it was mine too. I had rejected the idea of controlling her, of forcing her into a mold she didn't fit. I had accepted that this chapter of my life was over. Perhaps someday we would find our way back to each other. But if we didn't, I was at peace with that as well. The hardest part of all was learning to live without the weight of expectation, without the need to prove my worth to anyone. But now I had learned that I didn't need to prove anything. I had spent so many years defining my worth through what I gave and what I could control, but I had finally discovered the freedom of simply being. The freedom of living for myself, of loving without conditions. There were moments when the old feelings of inadequacy would creep in. Times when I missed Isabel's presence in my life, when I wondered if I had done something wrong. But those moments were fleeting now. I knew that I had done the best I could, and that was enough. I had given Isabel the gift of independence, even if it had come at the cost of our relationship. I had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that love cannot be measured by how much you give or how much you control. It is about acceptance, respect, and freedom. True love doesn't come with strings attached. It doesn't come with expectations or demands. It simply exists, free and unconditional. And I had finally learned to love myself in the same way, without expectations, without the need for validation, without the pressure to be anything other than who I truly was. Looking out over the ocean from my balcony, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The past no longer had a hold on me. I had found peace, not in my relationships, but within myself. I was no longer a woman defined by what she could give, by the roles she played, by the expectations of others. I was a woman who had learned to live for herself. And in that, I had found the greatest gift of all. I had moved on, not just from Isabel's rejection, but from the idea that my worth was defined by others. And that, I realized, was enough.